Ruler School is brought to you by Happy Little Hug Factory and these amazing patrons. Extra special thank you to guest lecturer patrons Brody Harris and Lance Albertson. Thank you for your support. Enjoy the video.
Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Paul. I'm bringing you a tournament report today from GP Rome. So before we get started, make sure you hit subscribe so you see more deck profiles, more feature matches, more tournament reports like this one, and of course listen to the Teacher's Lounge where Jeremy Franklin, Brandan Bremont, Frank Klosser, and Ryan Miles break down everything for Seville every week on Thursday. So go ahead, hit subscribe, ring the bell, and that way you're notified whenever we publish something. So there were a ton of different players that were present at GP Rome over this past Father's Day weekend. So let's take a look at those different rulers, but before we get started, I'm just going to remind everyone this is Reiya cluster only, so things that we see normally in New Frontiers, things like Lumia, things like that are not going to be present in this format because they're actually not allowed. So there are about 97 players in GP Rome. 20 players were playing Shahrazad, there were 18 Time Spinning Witch, 17 Tigress, 16 Gil, 8 Kirik, 7 Imel, 3 Shayla, 3 Ayu, 2 Reiya, 1 Scarlet, 1 Fair, and 1 Alhamat 2, which is the Alhamat ruler from the Secret Tomes structure deck. So it's notable that Reiya cluster is very different in terms of its ruler breakdown. We definitely saw Shahrazad make an appearance like she does in New Frontiers, but with the Time Spinning Witch, Tigress, and Gil, the format is very, very different, and the meta looks different as well. In terms of Gil, actually, Gil won the tournament with Federico Zappini and Marco Ferlito. I'm sorry about these names. I might mess these up. Please don't hold it against me. I'm going to try as hard as I can. But Federico Zappini and Marco Ferlito actually piloted the same list, and Zappini actually won the entire tournament. So the thing about Gil in Reiya is that he focuses very heavily on elementals, which is something he's supposed to do, and he uses those elementals to float will that can only be used for spirit magics like Winds of Vitality, Absolute Awareness, and the 5th element. So the cool thing about Gil is he got a really strong resonator in Gil Lapis. So Gil Lapis is a card that you can't cancel as it comes into the field if your J ruler, your ruler slash J ruler is Gil, or Gil the Gifted Conjurer. So he's a free 10/10 flyer with barrier that can also remove elementals for his own effects. And if you want to read more of any of these cards, because they're kind of difficult to see, that's something that, you know, just based on the limitations that we have, if you can't see any of these cards, all of the lists are going to be down in the description. So make sure you go down into the description and click on these. They're all going to be in order of 1st through 8th place, top 8, top 4, and then the winner is going to be at the very top of that list. But anyway, yeah, I'm really actually kind of impressed with this Gil list. I think it's really something different. I especially love this cancel spell because this is Winds of Salvation. Winds of Salvation is notably the only out to Gil Lapis in the entire cluster. In fact, I think it's the only out in the entire game, and if someone wants to correct me, go down in the comments and let me know. But I think this is the only way to stop him from coming into the field with a cancel spell, because technically it doesn't cancel him, it removes him from the chase altogether. In addition to that, we had Gianluca Di Clement, I am sorry still, and Eduardo Valenti actually running the same list for the Time Spinning Witch. And Clement actually got, he was in the final 2 matchup against Federico Zappini. So we had Gil versus the Time Spinning Witch slash Kaguya. So it's kind of like this control mirror that ended up happening in the final round. And so you can kind of get an idea of what the Time Spinning Witch does when you look at her Time Distortion chant, which has a God's Art, which prevents your opponent from recovering on their recovery phase, which is a really powerful effect, especially for something like blue. So notably, just keep this in mind, this blue ruler with her blue, or genuinely blue support, actually made it all the way to the top 2 in Reiya cluster, which means that, you know, there's definitely some blue power creep occurring. It wasn't long before we had the Time Spinning Witch that we actually had Ayu, which is another blue ruler. So I think it's really encouraging to see that, you know, we have blue rulers and blue support actually doing some really interesting stuff. But in general, the Time Spinning Witch, she floats Time Will, so you can use it to pay for things like Dinosaur surfacing. So Dinosaur surfacing, if you awaken it, you get to bring out a card like Mosasaurus from your deck, and Mosasaurus does a lot of really nasty stuff. Again, if you can't see the cards and you don't know what the cards do, there's a deck list for this deck down in the description. But this deck in general plays a lot of idols, and these idols fix your mana, so that way you can play things like Lorite's Disciples, Lorite in general. You can play this ramp spell from the latest set that gives you a new stone for 3. And it also cantrips, so you get to draw a card. And then of course they're playing the One Kingdom of Diversity, because there's a lot of stuff going on here in terms of dinosaurs, dragons, souls, idols, elves, and then I think these are just wizards, so like there's like some definite potential for you to just ramp up into these huge creatures. This Mosasaurus that can, with optional possession, fly over your opponent's board and just hit them for 20, which really hurts. So in general, I really like this list. I really like the Time Spinning Witch and how it's turning out in Reiya cluster. I think it's really interesting that they ran the Last Thunder in the sideboard as a way of getting rid of your opponent's board. And I also really like that they had to play Scarlet's Agony, because there was aggro that was potentially going to hit them. In addition to that, they had Glint of Insight, which, you know, if you notice, there's no black stones in the stone deck. The Speaker Stone can actually only tap for story chance, but because of Idol, you can actually make Black Will, so you can use Glint as a way of like ripping your opponent's hand apart, especially in the mirror match. That can be really clutch. In the top 4, we had a Shahrazad list from Valeria de Parasis. Gosh, forgive me, I'm really bad at these names. I'm gonna try my hardest again. But we have a Shahrazad list that is more of like a doll mid-range control. Something that I'm actually messing with right now is something really similar to this, just in New Frontiers in general. So this is actually kind of cool to see. So Shahrazad has an extra deck, and these are these 5 cards up here for those of you who don't know. And she can, she's the only ruler who can't side herself out for a different ruler because of the extra deck mechanic. So because of that, you can only side cards into your extra deck. That's why we have Seed of Rebirth, Last Days of a Powerless Dragonoid, and I believe that's it. It's the only other stories that this player runs. So in addition to that, you play the 3 Last Audience as a way of stopping aggro. Doll Audience gets really big with Puppet Maker, so when this comes in with Puppet Maker, you get this additional cantrip, but if you have Legend 3, it gives an addition +2/+2 to your Resonators that are dolls, and because Last Audience also gives +2/+2 to something that's a doll, this card can come in potentially as a 10/10, which is pretty relevant. Patrolling Guard Doll is the main aggro package next to Last Audience. And then you have things like Jupiter and Lorite's Disciples to kind of give you additional aggro options or control options in the late game. Next up we have Philip Kybier's Tigress list, which is just basically panda, tribal, aggro, mid-range stuff. So we have Gem Mallet Panda, Technique Power Gem Panda, I believe, something like that, and then we have like Power Gem Panda, who's just, you know, a first strike guy. But this 1-drop lineup is actually really strong. You have a way of producing mana, you have a way of being aggressive without your opponent being able to interact with you, and then you have this card that can just do first strike damage for 5/4, which is really strong for a 1-drop. Like most other things in the format don't really have something this big on turn 1. That being said, you also have things like Orphica, which is not really a source of removal, but it helps get your opponent's big stuff out of the way. You notably don't want to hit Mosasaurus, because then you just lose more stones, but for everything else it's really good if it doesn't have barrier. So she also gives +2/+2 to all your pandas, and if you have multiple, that affects stacks. And then if she dies, she just tutors a panda to your hand so you can play it. And that means you can tutor Rose Quartz, you can tutor Garnet, Cistern to quick cast on their turn. You can tutor Shinshin and Ray, so you can like make a big push with those and Zhang. There's a lot of different ways that you can use this deck, and it doesn't necessarily have to be aggressive. It can also sort of pull back and be a little bit more of a mid-range deck, and then use Resuscitating Will in the late game as a sort of way to sneak out extra damage and the game in general. What I think is really cool about this list is just that it's a panda list, right? So like, I haven't seen any pandas in New Frontiers at all, and the fact that pandas actually get a place to shine I think is really cool. And in fact, next up we have Alicio Campagna's Time Spinning Witch list, which is a little bit more, how do I put this? It's a little bit more straightforward because you have multiple copies of Dinosaur surfacing, you have multiple copies of Mosasaurus, not just 3. You also have Dino Rider as another option for Dinosaur surfacing, and this card is actually pretty intense. It comes in and it burns the board. If it kills something, I believe it gets swiftness, and it's just crazy. But in addition to that, of course, you have the generic removal for Time Spinning Witch, which is Dragon Lord's Breath. In addition to that, play Elemental Blast as a way of getting additional damage on board. It's 400 damage initially, but if you torrent it, it becomes 700, and because there's no Severing Winds, that torrent will happen more often than not. And of course, you're playing the Idols to fix your mana, and Distortion of Time as a way of stopping your opponent from recovering during their recovery phase and winning the game. It's sort of very similar to Door of Time in that sense, that it gives you like another... it gives you more space to do more of what you want to do because your opponent doesn't get to play on their turn. In addition to this, I think it's really interesting to see that we have a Carpenter Panda in the sideboard. Carpenter Panda is sort of like Grim the True King from Echoes of the New World, in that if it comes in and pops an addition, you get to search something, but in this situation it's a 3-drop, and you get to search out an addition of your own. So that could be your Kingdom of Diversity that you sided in, or it could also be one of your idols. So if you need a way, like if your opponent's just getting rid of your idols because of their own destruction of the portal, or if they have other ways of getting rid of your additions, you might want these back. So that's always something to keep in mind when you're playing a Carpenter Panda in the sideboard. You can always bring it in and bring out these guys or your kingdoms. In addition to that, they're playing Reincarnation of the Soul. I feel like this is a card that you use against Gil, so that Gil doesn't get to search off of his own recycling of his own elementals. And then, of course, our last deck for the day is Matthias Pinka and his Shahrazad list. And this Shahrazad list is a little bit different. It definitely focuses more on the control side of Shahrazad, and mostly that's because the last audience is notably in the sideboard as a means of getting rid of aggro. And its lowest cost resonator is going to be Lorite, and it has like a lot of removal as well. In Elemental Blast, Lorite's Deletion Magic to stop things that are on the chase, and of course Favor Spell and Scarlet's Agony to slow down all of those quick cast spells and all those like really aggressive resonators. So the difference here especially is there's actually 4 Eve in the main deck. Now that's something I've never seen before in a Shahrazad list. This is definitely something that I don't see at all. But of course in this format, Shahrazad might have a little bit more flexibility in terms of how you build her. So what's cool here is that Shahrazad's normal turn 1 opening is something like Approaching the Truth, so that way turn 2 you can search out your Puppet Maker or your Last Audience if you have one of these 2 combo pieces in hand. So you play the Puppet Maker and then you just go forward from there, and you just gain a bunch of cards. You can give stuff flying with Viola, especially things like Enormous Effigy, or if you have a Patrolling Guard doll, you have the ability to just give your stuff flying and have it swing in and do some crazy stuff. Of course, you have to have Winds of Salvation to take care of Gil Lapis and other problematic resonators. Like if Time Spinning Witch wants to hardcast a Mosasaurus for some reason, you can just remove it from the chase altogether and then it's gone. In addition to that, the deck focuses on Arrow Trap as a way of getting rid of, permanent get rid of any of your opponent's resonators that are coming in to push damage. And then of course they have the Elemental Uprising, Evil Elemental Uprising in the story deck, so that way they can get rid of Gil's elementals in a way that he can't recycle. Alright, so what are my thoughts after seeing these deck lists for GP Rome? Well, first thing that I like to think about is kind of what is the meta looking like as I go forward into the new cluster. So some people think this is kind of irrelevant. I mean, I kind of agree with them. It is something that you don't have to think about too much, but it is kind of nice to know exactly what meta decks are either going to be completely pushed out of the meta because of the new J rulers and mechanics we're getting, and it'll be nice to see what J rulers and decks are getting supported by the new stuff. So things like the Time Spinning Witch, Gil, Tigress, and other decks are gonna, in general, be boosted by support coming from blue, green, all the different colors that we have right now that are really strong. So when I think about the runes, we don't know anything about the runes yet, so the runes might just completely push all of these rulers out of the meta. That is definitely something that is a possibility. But at the same time, I like to think that, you know, maybe the runes will actually do something to support rulers in ways that, like we've seen in like the designer article, sort of scale to the different attributes of the different rulers. So we might see some general rune support for things like water rulers, or we might see some new water support that'll go into making Time Spinning Witch even more potent, have some new tools, be able to do some new tricks, and we might not see a lot going on for Gil because he's green, and green has got a lot of support. So I like to take all of this into mind when I'm moving into a new cluster, because stealth for a very long time, when I think back to Alice cluster, moving into Lapis cluster, I mean, stealth was still like really strong. It was something that we had pretty much throughout the entire format until new stuff pushed it out, but that was like mid-format, so I was still playing stealth with Mikage, things like that. So some people think that, you know, just looking at the rulers at the end of a cluster, thinking that that's not really that relevant, but there are times where I think it's actually kind of good to look back on those things as we move forward, because then we can say, well, is Tigress going to get better? Is Gil going to get better? Is Kirik going to get better? Is Shayla going to get better? Shayla should get better. But that's just me. And maybe a few of you as well get Shayla more support and stuff like that. We probably won't see anything like direct support, but who knows? We don't know what's coming down the pipe. This is a whole nother cluster, a whole different set of ideas in terms of design. So in terms of just looking at Reiya as a cluster, seeing what's strong naturally, I think that's something that we need to keep in mind as we move forward. In addition, we have things like the Time Spinning Witch, which I did not think was going to do super well, but of course things like Mosasaurus and Dinosaur Surfacing is actually really strong and well supported by things like the Time Spinning Witch, who, you know, floats this, you know, random will that you can use in the awakening cost of Dinosaur Surfacing. So you can just pull Mosasaurus out of the deck, set them back like several turns, you know, keep a lot of their stones frozen so they can't recover in their recovery phase. That's really strong, in addition to Distortion of Time, which does a lot of the same things with this God's Art. And then, you know, being able to do this before you flip into the Time Spinning Witch Part 2, having access to this God's Art again, that's relevant as well, as especially the Dragon Lord's Breath, which is just such a really potent card in this list, just like pushing back so many different resonators that could be attacking you, and you get to replace it, and it's all for one will, in addition to the awakening, of course. I think if this card in particular was like a 2-will, you know, awaken for 2 time, awaken for like a regular time, this card would be completely unplayable and would not be nearly as good as it is right now. All of the support and more is super strong in the Time Spinning Witch, especially because we get all the green support as well if we just run Idols. So let's talk about Tigress a little bit, because I think Tigress is probably one of the more surprising rulers that I saw, mostly because when I think of aggression, or I think of rushing people down with resonators, I definitely think of red, right? And so traditionally red has been this color that you stick these swiftness resonators and you swing in, you deal damage like really quickly. Not that Tigress does that, but he definitely plays these really sticky resonators, things like the technique Gem Warrior, I believe is the one with barrier. And she has some really high stats because of Tigress being a panda and herself being a panda. She gets that buff. So like she, in terms of Power Gem Warrior as well, he gets really buff as well and has that first strike ability. So all of these like really good one drops coming out of pandas is really strong. Not to mention Gem Mallet Panda, which functions as like kind of like a pseudo sacred elf for the deck, and it just generates gems and gems and gems like nobody's business, and so it's able to just fuel all of these like plays. Shinshin and Reiya can come out relatively easy if you sacrifice 3 gems by turn 3. And it's not a hard thing to imagine that you can play that on turn 3, and you only have to worry about a Lorite to stop its effect from actually happening. So Gem Mallet Panda is one of those cards that, you know, we saw not in this past set, but we saw it in Time Spinning Witch, and it was just one of those like really solid cards that pandas needed in order to be competitive. But even before that, they had Orpha kind of bump all of their pandas up by +2/+2 and search them out. Blink stuff in your opponent's side of the field, so that way, you know, you can get all your attacks in. Pandas are definitely the aggro deck of choice because even though Kirik has the potential to, you know, do all the things that pandas do it better because white has all of the support and red has been kind of let down a little bit. I mean, they got a little bit of stuff in this past set, but pandas just got so much more from things like Flourishing Open, Resuscitating Will, Aura of Hope, Arrival of the Hero. I mean, like all of these really strong cards are in white, and there's definitely more of a reason to play pandas than there is to play Kirik.
So I think also what's really cool on top of Time Spinning Witch and Tigress is we see things like Gil, and Gil just up and wins a whole event, and I don't think we've ever seen that in New Frontiers at all. So Gil is kind of a weird ruler in my opinion. I always thought he was really strange because he had the ability to mill his own deck, which is, you know, something that Black is really more known for, at least in, you know, the Magic, like, Kaijudo color wheel. Like, Black is known for, like, milling stuff more. But Gil puts that all to great effect because he does all this stuff with elementals, removing them from the graveyard, creating this will that can only be used for spirit magic. I think it's a really cool concept and a really cool mechanic. So in general, I think Gil in New Frontiers has a lot of different tools, but especially like in this format, he gets to use a lot of tools that we haven't seen at all, like Elemental Blast. But in general, like the 4 cards that we see here are probably the most powerful cards going forward in New Frontiers. So you have things like the 5th element, so you reveal all these elementals, you kill something, you know, 300 for every elemental you reveal. That's really strong, and it's a spirit magic, and it's a 1-cost spirit magic, so Gil can do it on his front side. That's really important. I think that's why Gil has the potential to do some board control, but in addition to like late game, you have things like Inheritor of the Stars Gil Lapis, who can't be cancelled, and there's only like one good way of getting rid of him in the current format, and that's Winds of Salvation, because it just removes him from the chase altogether, which there's only one answer to this guy besides just killing him by battle, and it's really hard to kill him by battle because he can just remove elementals from the graveyard and just give himself stat bumps. He's a flying barrier, just awesome resonator. It's very, very strong, especially in Gil. So if you flip Gil and you go into Gil Lapis at the same time, have them both on the board, that's a lot of damage, and you can't interact with them because they both have barrier. So before I go, I want to talk about Kirik, because I think for a lot of people, Kirik not being in the format might seem a little odd. Again, like Tigress being the aggro deck of choice is very different than what most people would intuitively guess is the best aggro deck of the format, right? Because red is typically that color. So the thing that we should note about Kirik in New Frontiers versus Kirik in Reiya Cluster only is that there are no dual stones except for some very specific stones that only do specific things at specific times with specific rulers, right? Or when specific conditions are met. Specifically, we have no dual stones at all that work generically. So Blasting Waves does not exist in the Reiya cluster. Now they're to do the counter stones. So I'm not really sure. I think it's Summer's Breeze, the one that naturally produces red but has 2 counters you can remove to produce green. Those are mostly used in the New Frontiers list because they're just very straightforward and they give you pretty much complete access to green without any real drawbacks unless you hit Dragon Ore instead. Which is kind of unfortunate if you do hit it, but generally you're not too worried about it, right? So you can run things like, you can run 3 Lorite, 4 Severing Winds, and 3 Fair's spells in your main board, and you can pretty much protect yourself from pretty much anything your opponent throws out. In addition to that, you get something like Sylvia Blade of the Supreme King, which makes sure that you get 6 damage in, and your opponent can't block it at all. But in addition to that, I think those are like the main issues that we're seeing here, in addition to just no Severing Winds. So Severing Winds is just a free, I'm going to get my aggro through without any issues, and because those do not exist in the Reiya cluster, Kirik pretty much has to go mono red, which is not ideal. Like typically in Force of Will you want to have multiple colors because then you have more options, and mono red is just not that great right now.
So guys, let me know what you think down in the comment section down below. What did you think of GP Rome? Do you like the Reiya cluster only tournaments that Italy does? Are there rulers you wish were in the top 8? Let me know down in the comments, and while you're there you might as well hit subscribe and hit the bell as well, so that way you get different deck profiles, tournament reports, feature matches, and of course the Teacher's Lounge on Thursdays. So anyway guys, this has been Paul. It's been good talking with you, and I'll see you next time.